alternate. Yes, ma'am.
I might have just missed this in your presentation, but what is the relationship between Sam Owens, or the AG, and the perpetrators, the original perpetrators? Is it just that they're all Georgia officials?
Well, here's how it works. There's a systemic problem, structural problem with the way the Attorney General's office is set up, regardless of who's the Attorney General. The Attorney General is supposed to investigate and prosecute crimes in state government. So if somebody says $9 million is missing, there's been fraud, the financials have been falsified, it's the Attorney General's job to go and investigate and prosecute that. It is also the Attorney General's job to represent the Board of Regents in the University System of Georgia. So so they're supposed to represent them, they're also supposed to investigate and prosecute them. They don't do the investigate and prosecute, they do represent, they do defend. So the Attorney General's office has defended against my cases. The Attorney General's office has not investigated and prosecuted the crimes. The first case that came up at the University of Georgia, the way the whole tenure revocation came about was that Mike Adams was violating university policy to retaliate against this professor who was criticizing the president. And they were violating University of Georgia and Board of Regents policy in retaliating against this professor. He had study abroad programs. They were denying credit for it, even though it was UGA curriculum taught by a University of Georgia professor at a university, foreign university, with which Georgia had what's called a cooperative agreement, which means that Georgia has to accept the transfer credits from that university. Well, they're denying the credits, violating university policy. Also, by the way, later on, it was that cooperative agreement was one of the records that disappeared, and they claimed it didn't exist, and there really was no cooperative agreement, but it did exist, and we found it and said, oh, is this the cooperative agreement that you denied the existence of with your signature on it? Please, thank you. That was that's the way the court hearing went. So I wrote to the Board of Regents and said, Mike Adams is inappropriately violating university and university system policy by retaliating against this professor. You need to investigate it. I get a response from the Attorney General's office. They call me up and say, we have approved a tenure revocation action against your professor on behalf of the people you asked us to investigate. So they did not investigate the people for violating the policy. The people violating the policy said this professor is a bad apple, bad egg, whatever, and we want to revoke his tenure. So the Attorney General says, okay. So and this has spanned, to be fair, several different Attorney Generals. That actually started under Thurber Baker. I wrote Thurber Baker a letter, because I'm just a stupid copyright attorney. I don't know any better. I wrote him a letter and said, how could this be that I asked you to investigate Mike Adams and you don't investigate Mike Adams? Instead, at Mike Adams' request, you instituted tenure revocation action against the professor who he was retaliating against and who asked you to investigate. And Thurber Baker wrote me back a very nice letter and said, well, we represent the University of Georgia, and they're our client, and we have to do what they say. And that, I think there's a very serious problem with that, and that is a tenet of legal ethics. If I represent you as your attorney, at the end of the day, you call the shots in your case. I have to do what you say, unless I'm helping you to commit a crime. I can't do that ethically. So the Attorney General's office has taken that basic premise of legal ethics and completely distorting it and saying, we have to do what the Board of Regents tells us to because they're our client. What they leave out is, one, I would argue that the Attorney General's office has to have something higher to answer to than just an ambulance chasing attorney. I have to do what my client says. That the Attorney General's office is the top legal office, law enforcement office in the state, and that they have a duty to say, wait a minute, our client may want to do this, but this is wrong and illegal. And also, that also follows the legal ethics rule that you cannot, aid and abet your, client to, continue perpetrating a crime. So, but that's the basic impasse. I would, you talk about getting involved in doing something. I mean, I wish everybody in the Madison Forum, everybody in the state of Georgia would write to Chris Carr and say,
Yes.
why do you not care that their $9 million has never been accounted for at Georgia Perimeter College? Why do you not care that these financial reports were falsified, which is a felony? The list goes on and on.
The original guy that resigned, wasn't he forfeiting his right to sue them when he resigned? I mean, didn't it?
Well, that's a very complicated question that you just asked. The truth is, he never resigned. You're talking about Anthony DeColi, and that's what they've claimed, and that's what the court said. It's more complicated than I can go into. One way you can waive sovereign immunity of the state is by a written contract. There's the Constitution, and there's a statute that says if you have a written contract with the state, then you can sue the state on that contract. They waive sovereign immunity for a written contract. So, so right there, we have the right to sue the state. We have the right to get into the courthouse. We have the right to present our evidence. But they say no because you resigned, and therefore you lost all your rights. There's several problems with that. One, even though he supposedly resigned, they violated his contract before the supposed resignation. And, it doesn't matter if you resign later. If there was a contract in effect, the state breached it, and they're liable to be sued under that contract, even if no matter what happened later. While the contract was in effect, it was breached. You have a right to sue them for that breach at that time the contract was in effect. So the court is completely fudging to make up this resignation exception to the waiver of sovereign immunity. The other thing that's more nefarious, which was the university system officials knew about the missing money and hid it from Tricoli for well over a month. The documents show them scurrying to make up their cover story that they're going to give to the AJC and to use against Tricoli. The day that they claim they first learned about the budget shortfall, in which they were lying. They had known about it long before, but the day the announcement came out, it became public knowledge that there's $16 million shortfall. That day, without any investigation, they demanded Tricoli's resignation. They threatened, Hancock could be threatened to fire him if he would not resign. They released all this false negative information to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, trashing and tarring Tricoli. I don't know if you remember back in 2012, but similar to what happened to Pap at Kennesaw State, they made it sound like he had stolen, hundreds of thousands of dollars, which was not true in either case. And it was actually the university system that was violating its policies. But so they tried to coerce Tricoli into resigning first. And he refused to resign. He said, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not resigning. These people were falsifying the reports to me. They should be criminally prosecuted. I'm not resigning. And I've done a great job as president of this school, which he had. So, so he would not resign under threats of coercion. So then Hancock tried a different tack, and he said, oh, Anthony, if you will just resign and go quietly, we'll give you another job in the university system office downtown. And then when, after Huckabee actually announced that in the media that Tricoli had already been moved to the university system office. Tricoli had not accepted that position. He had not resigned his position as president, but Huckabee was already announcing in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that Tricoli had been moved to the system office, to a new job. So Tricoli goes, I don't know what's going on, but there's some problem here. So he rushed to, in writing, accept that new offer. He never resigned as president, but he accepted the new offer because he realized they're trying to maneuver somehow, I don't know what it is, but I'm trying to protect myself. He accepted the new offer, and then Huckabee wrote him a letter saying, well, you were not renewed as president of Georgia Perimeter College, and therefore you're terminated, with no mention of the new job that he had both offered and that Tricoli had accepted, and that Huckabee had announced to the press. Huckabee just said, "You're gone." What the other missing part that we did not know until after this case had gone through the whole court system, and we actually have a motion in front of the court now to reopen the case because of this. What they're and the other thing that's important to remember, when I talk about sovereign immunity and all the things that they prevent us from doing, they don't let us go to a jury. The other thing they don't let us do is even to do discovery. Usually you file a civil action, you get to do discovery. The other side has to turn over all their documents and records, and you can look at them just to try to see if they did something wrong. Documents, and we were never allowed to do discovery in any of the cases. Totally illegally barred from doing discovery. The law says we get to do discovery. The courts have said, no, you cannot do discovery. But what we, by our own means, through investigation and getting documents at great pains and expense that we shouldn't have to go through, found documents showing that while this whole debate was going on about whether Tricoli was going to resign, Huckabee was threatening him, I'll do this, I'll do that if you don't resign. And then Huckabee was saying, oh, I'll give you another job if you resign. The decision had already been made, and Tricoli was already fired, and his replacement had already been selected while all this was going on. And then they want to say, oh, well, you lost all your rights because you resigned. You don't get to have hearings for being fired because you resigned, when in fact, he had already been fired. He was the only one who didn't know.
Thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In every college within the Georgia University system, there is a Department of Internal Auditor. What's your experience with the relying on the investigations that they conduct in that office?
Well, there are two things. One, well, each school has its own little audit system. The university system has its own audit system. There's independent state auditors. So another very funny thing that happened in the Georgia Perimeter College case, not only was the hearing blocked, not only did the Attorney General do no criminal investigation, but there was supposed to be a state audit of Georgia Perimeter College, which was stopped in order for the university system to do its own review of what happened, in which they created this, it was too long to go into all the explanation, but a completely fraudulent report about what happened and where the money went and what happened. So all of those audit processes were evaded. The other thing about it, when they said, you know, Andrew Tricoli, you should have gone and looked at the ledgers yourself and looked at the accountant work papers. And you just take, I don't know how many of you like own or run your own business or whatever, and say you're the president of a college or CEO of a business, and somebody tells you you are responsible for going down, putting on your own green eye shade, and you can't rely on your CPA's report or your internal audit report or anything. You should go yourself and look at the accountant's work papers and go through them at 2 o'clock in the morning to determine whether they're telling you the truth or not. And anybody who's ever been a CEO or president or anything can say that's insane. I could not possibly function that way as a president. The audit reports, but they also said, you know, Andrew Tricoli, there were state audit reports that you should have been able to look at and see that the school was going into the red. The problem that does not mention, one is if Andrew Tricoli should have seen it, the vice president of fiscal affairs should have seen it, the audit people at the university system should have seen it, Steve Wrigley, Hank Huckabee should have seen it, everybody should have seen it. A lot of people who should have seen it before Anthony Tricoli saw it. He's the president running the whole university. He's not the accountant for the university. There are audit people. And so theoretically, you can go into the audit reports, and if you are trained, you could go and see where, oh my God, they're you know, on you know, page 29 of a 52-page report, they're alleging he should have been able to look and say, oh, on page 29, I see that there's a, you know, deficit developing here. you know, everybody I've talked to, including former chancellor of the university system, says that if that were in the audit reports, findable in the audit reports, it should have been on page 1 in giant block capital letters and red exclamation points that you know, you are running a deficit, that it shouldn't be, you know, hidden on, you know, footnote 2 of page 29 buried in this report. So the audit system completely failed.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying too is like being rank and file or being a professor or whatever and contacting them, the Department of Internal Auditing right there at the university, then it's kind of like, it sounds like there's so much corruption that that's not even gonna keep, it's not going to get to the right ears.
Well, here is what was happening at Georgia Perimeter College. There were basically 2 sets of books. It's like the most basic fraud known to man. They were reporting one thing to not only to Tricoli, but the rest of the administration. We have reports that they made, like to the faculty senate, where they said, wonderful, we have a $30 million surplus. When their own internal emails going back and forth saying, it is about to hit the fan, we are about to spend the last of our reserves, and we are going to go down the toilet. That's what their internal emails are saying. Well, they're saying, it's wonderful, we have a $30 million surplus. Andrew Tricoli just, you know, go on running the university like you know, have been doing. So there was, the fraud reached into that.
Yeah, okay.
You know.
I am struck by the parallels between what you described in Georgia and the malfeasance in the FBI and the Department of Justice. It's almost uncanny to me. But the question is this, I'm only surface familiar with this, I'm curious whether you are familiar with this. I believe I got the county right, I believe it was Gwinnett County, and I think it would involve the Chamber of Commerce and the Board of Education there, and I may have the county wrong, but I believe that's right. But this is another case that went nowhere, in which supposedly that private organization and that government organization, the Board of Education, deal was made where certain land was provided, certain monies exchanged hand. There was complaints to that, but it went nowhere. Are you familiar with that at all?
I am familiar with it, and it's. I have not directly been involved in that case. That was when I was still a copyright attorney. I didn't know about all this RICO corruption yet.
The movie that I was watching, an old movie with Charlton Heston when he was playing Moses in the Ten Commandments, and he's talking to Pharaoh, and he says, men were made to be ruled by laws, not the will of other men. And it just stuck with me that so many things like this, if we're made to be ruled by laws, then...
Well, that's what I'm arguing for. The Pharaoh had sovereign immunity, and the Attorney General of Georgia has the same sovereign immunity today. Unfortunately.
Stephen, I want to thank you for your work and let you know that you helped win a case that you may not even know about. A couple of years ago, I had to file a civil complaint against Cobb County for spending SPLOST money that on projects that were not on the approved SPLOST list. And when I filed that complaint, the county answered that they had sovereign immunity against that action. And being the simple man I am, I think what I did was just went home and Googled, how can you fight sovereign immunity in Georgia? And your picture came up.
Not the FBI.
That's right. It wasn't a moonshot. Yeah. But I read your work, I did research, and I applied what I could apply locally to Cobb County, and I did more research, and I said, okay, they responded to my complaint by saying they have sovereign immunity, so I replied back, you entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the cities of Cobb County, and then you worked to spend this money illegally together. And after I filed that response, the case went forward. It was not thrown out. And the week before the hearing was to begin, Cobb County gave me everything I had asked for to see.
Well, that's great. Congratulations to you. I wish I gotten paid for my advice.
You were right there with me, 3 a.m. I had Stephen Humphreys folder, you know. But thank you for your work. I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
really.
Talking about all the stuff you've managed to discover in this case, I'm sure some of it did come by way of a whisper in your ear. Not so much from filing a motion for discovery.
We have never gotten any response to the state from anything. In fact, the Attorney General's office, I say, acts in such bad faith. We're not allowed to do any discovery. They have defended these cases, and going back to the original case where how they were hiding the evidence, the Attorney General has defended the cases by arguing that documents don't exist that they have in their possession. In Tricoli's original case, he had a written contract with the state. You know, they fired him, ran him out the door. He didn't manage to get out the door with his written contract. They had the copy of his written contract. We allege that in the complaint. He has a written contract. You haven't. The Attorney General has it. So they came into court and argued that there was no written contract. If he had a written contract, he would produce it. He would da-da-da-da-da. And so we made an open records request and got the written contract that they had all along. But they were arguing there was
Open records.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though. I could do all kinds of open records requests, but open records requests cost money. If I sue in a civil case in court, I am entitled to all of those documents, which are thousands and thousands of pages, for free. What they're doing now is saying you can't have no discovery. You can file an open records request, which we may or may not answer. Some of the open records requests they never answer. And if they do answer, you have to pay for the documents. So I don't really want. I'm representing people whose lives have been ruined, their careers have been ruined, to have no money to, you know, it's like coming out of my pocket to go on. So I don't really need to, you know, make an open records request that, you know, cost me, you know, $50,000 to, you know, get all of the documents, which they, by law, are obligated to give me for free. In terms of not answering the request, there's a very key document. There was a report. I told you about the vice presidents of finance at Georgia Perimeter College who bypassed Anthony Tricoli to send a report up to Steve Wrigley and Hank Huckabee at the USG saying, guess what? We really are missing $16 million. That bypassed Tricoli. 2 months later, Hank Huckabee and Steve Wrigley say, we just learned for the first time that there's $16 missing. We never knew until today. That report 2 months earlier to them showing that they did know that $16 million was missing has never been produced in response to any open records request, not just by me, but other people who filed specific requests asking about the finances of Georgia Perimeter College. What did the USG know about it? The AJC at the time, even though they repeated the false information that was given to them by the USG, they even a little bit asked the question like, how come the USG, how come the university system, how come the Board of Regents didn't know, you know, if there were $16 million missing? They did know. They've hidden the report that proves that they knew before they say they knew. And they've never produced it in response to open records requests. We can only prove that it exists by emails that refer to it and refer to what's in it, but the actual report that they pretend does not exist.
Are you by any chance in a position to take on the research that would be necessary to proceed to a federal grand jury as a private attorney general under 42 U.S.C. 1988? I mean, you're going to be opposed dramatically by the United States attorneys in attempting such a thing, but private attorney general is a fact in federal jurisprudence, so.
Well, can I do it? You know, theoretically I can. You know, do I have the time and resources?
That's what I'm
If
talking.
somebody was, you know, what is happening, this is, you know, I think everybody here is like believes in free enterprise and capitalism, but I am an example of socialism.
Yes.
Because I am doing, it's not only doing it for free, it's costing me money
Yes, I
to do
understand.
this. So and people come to me and say, can you do this and can you do that? I'm like, you know,
What would you require?
how's your bank account?
It's fixing to get better, that's why I'm asking.
this may be a quick question and answer, and that is, I was thinking during your presentation that we needed to go back to the legislature, but it sounds like we have all the laws in place that are necessary.
Yeah, the legislature is the last place I want to go. And there's actually, here's what I tell people. By accident, the law that's on the books is good. In fact, it's so good they want to pretend it doesn't exist. The RICO statute says that you can sue a governmental entity, and that you can read the court opinions where they're throwing me out of court. The real question is, what does the RICO statute say? And you can read those opinions. The judges will not mention one word. The Attorney General, in his arguments, does not mention one word of what the RICO statute actually says. They want to ignore it, pretend it does not exist. So the law is good. I do not need to go to the legislature. And I say by accident because I'm thinking, if the legislature knew when they wrote that law that it was going to allow somebody like me to come and because, and this is true, this is the first time anybody knows of, and I've talked to attorneys and whatever around the country, the first time that the RICO statute has ever been used this way to bring a civil action against the government for public corruption. So nobody ever thought of it, but it's written in the law, as I said, by accident. If the legislature, if I went to the legislature, I'm sure they'd change it to say you cannot. Okay, I make one more point. So here's another thing that's going on in the world of Alice in Wonderland fantasy. Chris Carr had a little commission over the last 6 months or so to address problems of sovereign immunity. And I wouldn't talk to Chris Carr, and I volunteered to be a part of this. I know we're adversaries, but I had researched and studied a lot about sovereign immunity. I know what the problems of sovereign immunity are, there are things that need to be corrected. Some of those things like the state trooper, that have nothing to do with my case, but the state trooper's immune for sexually molesting, that's baloney, and that needs to be corrected. But you can imagine they wanted no part of my opinion or participation in this commission. And all of these real problems of sovereign immunity that exist, they completely ignore. They file a report with the governor, and they have a bill in the legislature now supposedly addressing sovereign immunity. It does not address any of these issues at all. The reason that it came up is the Georgia Supreme Court, that is, we have like a bunch of Tories on the Georgia Supreme Court who really think they're living in the days of King George. They baffle attorneys who appear, so they're using this doctrine they call originalism, which is what Neil Gorsuch says that he believes in, which is you go back to the beginning of time to see what the original intent of you forget about the law. In law school, they taught us the most recent law written on the books is what controls, and it overrides everything that came before. But they've turned it backwards and said, okay, we're going to go back to the days of King George. What would King George do? And so they actually, in a case called Sustainable Coast versus the Department of Natural Resources, the Georgia Supreme Court they expanded sovereign immunity to say that you cannot sue a state agency. If a state agency, like the Department of Natural Resources, is supposed to enforce coastal protection laws, the Department of Natural Resources was not enforcing the laws, they were actually breaking the laws. A group came and sued them to get an injunction to say, state agency, you must follow the law that you're supposed to enforce. They said, no, we don't have to because we have sovereign immunity. And the Georgia Supreme Court came down with a decision that said, that's correct, you cannot sue a state agency to enjoin them to try to make them follow the law. They have sovereign immunity according to what Lord Coke said in 1608. Forget about the law that's on the books today. And then they went back and grabbed another little tenet out of the laws of King George, said you cannot sue the state, but what you could do in medieval England, you could not sue the king, but you could sue his ministers. So they said, the Georgia Supreme Court said, you cannot sue the state agency to make them follow the law. But according to Lord Coke in 1608, you can sue his ministers, so therefore your only recourse is to sue the state official in his individual capacity to try to enforce the law of the state agency. At which point, every state official in Georgia went berserk because it came to them. It's like the Georgia Supreme Court is telling everybody to sue us in our individual capacity. Obviously, they don't want that. So that is why they have a bill going to the legislature to protect the state against itself again.
Good news is that the newspaper printed online Tuesday, they're printing this Wednesday, the Cab Neighbor. I can give everyone this handout. God willing, the two other newspapers that interview will print. The highest court right now is always God, we know that. But the court of blank opinion has removed members of Congress. What is that, the court of public opinion? Stephen, what can these folks do if this message doesn't leave this room? It's a waste of time. Can they come with me to Chris Carr's office? Because once I see him in person and say, you're going to need a new realtor, what will happen? Because as a candidate for governor, I will put the heat on him, and he knows he's in trouble. All the DAs in this state and judges know about me, believe me. I'm fighting for you and your families, and as a candidate right now, as a statesman candidate for governor, we the people, using the court of public opinion, can force this into the grand jury that quick. 20 members of the board of the Gymnastic Olympic Committee are gone. Members of Congress have been removed. Stephen, how do you feel about that? The court of public opinion, the people here going with either me and you or both of us to Chris Carr's office.
Well, that's what needs to happen, and I already, urged people to, write to Chris Carr. I believe this is like the Spotlight movie. This is, part of the response I get to these suits is, what kind of nut are you? Everybody knows all this corruption is going on, and what do you think you're going to do about it? I mean, just go home and forget it. It's just accept the corruption. That's kind of the culture, and that. Go home and watch the movie Spotlight if you haven't seen it, and you'll see where this thing went on for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, just like with the Olympic gymnasts, it's all of a sudden unacceptable. And I would love for this to all of a sudden become unacceptable in the state of Georgia, and for the people who let the government know that. It's you're having to hear about it from me because it's not in the media. The media will not print. There was actually in this county a columnist who wrote a column about my cases for publication in the newspaper, and this was a regular columnist and a regular slot to fill, and the management of the newspaper spiked the column and said we cannot afford to piss these people off, and you cannot run this column. So that is partly what I'm up against. Nobody knows this is happening, so I would please spread the word, let everybody know what's happening, let Chris Carr or whoever, suits your, whim, know that you don't think it's right, and that, asking, why was there never an investigation of where the $9 million that's unaccounted for?
Is there someone else running for Attorney General besides Chris Carr?
Does somebody else know that? Who's, Paul, you know who's running for it? Who's?
Well, nobody even knows, they hardly know Sam Owens since he's gone. And nobody knows the name Chris Carr. So, and nobody pays attention to the Attorney General's office because, as you said, everybody's been sent home. Don't bother, there's so much corruption, forget about it.
Have you thought about running for Attorney General?
I have not, but I don't know.
That would get the word out.
Humphreys for Attorney General.
Well, you can be my campaign treasurer.
That's a very good idea.
Like I said, people have all kinds of ideas of what I can do. They just don't have the ideas of how I'm going to pay for it.
Just as a quick suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, if any of you know or can get to a grand jury or a grand juror, one of the things a grand jury has the statutory authority to do is to appoint a local citizen to assist them. A grand jury could pick up the phone, call Chris Carr and tell him that man right there is going to be running a state-sponsored criminal investigation for us, this grand jury, and he will be bringing his evidence back to us and we'll provide him all of the assistance he needs. as a special assistant attorney general? A lot of people.
Well, I wish I could be appointed. I have written 5 times to the governor of Georgia about all these cases, sent all the documentation. The governor has statutory authority when the attorney general either will not or cannot investigate crimes. The governor has the authority, specific authority to appoint an independent investigator called a special attorney general, which, you know, they wanted to appoint me. I know about all these cases, but appoint somebody, anybody to do an independent investigation, and the governor has never even answered any of the letters.
You forgot to include the check.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.